I'm going to install Windows Server 2025 on my Windows 11 computer. And this also works on Windows 10 and Windows 8.1. Anything that has Hyper-V on it. And you can also install it, of course, on Windows Server, where you can install Hyper-V as well. In a previous video, I showed you how to log into the Insider preview and download the file. I'm downloading the VHDX file. Now, I first tried to download the ISO file, but it gave me problems trying to boot from it. So instead, I'm going to download the Windows Server 2025 VHDX file. So I've clicked on Download Now, and you can see in this upper right-hand corner, it's still downloading, but it'll be done shortly. In the meantime, I'm going to set up my Hyper-V. So I'm going to minimize that, and then what you can do is go to the search box and type in Hyper-V. Now, if Hyper-V is already installed, you can go ahead and run it as the administrator. If not, you can go ahead and choose Turn Windows Features On or Off, and then check the box for Hyper-V. Click OK, and then restart, and then Hyper-V will be started for you, and you go ahead and go to this next step. So, Hyper-V, once again, we're going to run it as the administrator. Now you can see that I already have multiple different virtual machines on here. That's okay. They're all off, so it's not going to cause any problem. I'm going to choose New Virtual Machine. Now in the Virtual Machine Manager, the wizard pops up, and I can go ahead and choose Next. I'm going to call this Windows Server 2025. Now, if you're doing this from an ISO file, you can choose the location where you want to install it. But if you're doing this from a VHDX file, like I'm doing, just go ahead and click Next. Make sure you choose Generation 2. Generation 2 has been around since Windows Server 2012 R2, so you can go ahead and leave that as Gen 2. Gen 1 are for really much older operating systems. Next. Now you want to choose the correct startup memory. So I'm going to right-click on my taskbar and choose Task Manager to tell me how much RAM I can use. So I'll click on the box that says the little picture of the CPU, and you can see that I've got 32 gigs of RAM, and I'm not even using half of it. So I could easily use 8 gigs on here, but you don't want to use more than 75% of your memory here. So make sure that you choose accordingly. You don't use too much, otherwise everything will run really slowly or crash. Now, I also know that on my CPU, I have a lot of logical processors. So you can see here I've got 16 logical processors that I can assign to my virtual machine. So I'll show you how to do that here shortly as well. So I'm going to change this from 4 gigabytes to around 8 gigabytes. And leave the dynamic memory for the virtual machine, which means that it'll just use as much as it needs up to that 8 gigabytes. I do want to choose my network connection. I've got multiple ones here, but you probably will only see one in your particular option if you just installed Hyper-V. But I have multiple ones, so I'll just choose one that I know will work. Now we want to choose to use an existing virtual hard disk. So if you chose the option I did to download the VHDX file, then you want to choose that and you want to browse to it. Here you can see that it's just using 10 gigabytes, so it's not very much space, and you can certainly allocate more if you need it. And it looks like it's just about done. All right, the file is all done, so I'm going to browse to it. It's on my desktop, so I'll choose Desktop. And then I chose my VHDX file I just downloaded, so I'll click Next and Finish. Once that's finished, I can go ahead and start it up. But first, I want to make sure I have the right amount of logical processors. So as I showed you in my Task Manager, that I had 16 processors. So I want to make sure that I'm using at least 8 processors. Otherwise, it's just going to run really slowly. Now, you may see a different amount of logical processors. I don't recommend you use more than half of your available processors, so just go ahead and choose accordingly. This same procedure will work if you're installing this on Hyper-V on a Windows server like Server 2019 or 2022 or even 2016. You can go ahead and install the Hyper-V feature and add roles and features, and then the process after that is exactly the same as what you see here. Inserting a 10 gigabyte VHDX file into a Hyper-V does take some time, so you do need to be patient. If you're downloading the ISO to use VMware, just be aware that right now that may or may not work just because there may be a bug in the ISO file. But it's all done after a couple of minutes, and there's my Windows Server 2025. Now I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to choose Settings. Now inside Settings, you can see, oh, I'm using 8 processors. Perfect. So if you see less than half or more than half of your logical processors available, just make sure that you adjust that as needed. Now I'm going to right click on it and choose Connect. And when I choose Connect, it's actually connecting to the virtual machine as if I was standing in front of a physical server. So when I boot off of this, it should just start right in to Windows Server 2025. And I'm going to switch to full screen mode so we can watch that happen. And the first time you launch it up, it might take a little bit more time, but then after that, it should go pretty smoothly. Now I'm running on an SSD drive. If you're running on a spindle drive that's like a hard disk drive, this may run a lot more slowly, even if you have enough RAM and CPU. So you just need to be patient. You could also buy a USB 3 SSD drive, plug it in and install it on that instead, and it'll run much more quickly. You have to, of course, have a USB 3 or USB-C connection on your computer if you buy that type of external drive. Otherwise, you won't see that speed. And after a couple of minutes, it starts up. It asks your home country, the language and keyboard. Click Next. Now you need a product key. Well, I don't have a product key, so I'm just going to choose to do this later. And choose Accept and put in my password. And now click Finish. And it's finalizing my settings. Now I'm going to log in for the first time to Windows Server 2025. It's the first time I've seen it as well, so I'm probably just as excited as you are. And you are going to see some command boxes that pop up and run little scripts in the background, so don't be too surprised about that. Now we're seeing the option for sending diagnostic data to Microsoft. You can choose included, optional, required. I don't really care. It's just a test box. And there we are. So I'm going to choose to close the Admin Center option. And I'm now in Windows Server 2025. It looks a lot like the Windows 11 type of start menu, which is really interesting. Server Manager pops right up. I can click Tools, and here are all my default tools. Pretty cool. Let's minimize Server Manager, and there's the desktop, the new desktop picture for Server 2025. I'm going to do a lot more videos on this, so take a look at the playlist. I'm going to install Active Directory, do file shares, do all different kinds of things on Server 2025.